Hi, this is Alyce-Kay Ruckelshaus of Threshold of Hineni, and today we're going to be talking about Esther 2. Now, if you happen to be following along with me as I'm doing these videos, I apologize because I'm kind of changing my mind on how I'm doing this. I was trying to talk about the chapter that we were actually reading that day, and since today is February 7th, we read chapter 7. But from watching the numbers of views and getting the comments from people who are following this, most people are not actually watching the videos on the day that I publish them. And so it doesn't really make sense for me to jump around all over the place in Esther and trying to stay on the chapter that we're reading that day. It would be better to just go through it in order. So we've already done chapter 1. We did that on the 1st, and we've done chapter 4 on Monday. So I'm going to renumber those so that chapter 4 will be part 4. Excuse me. I got a little excited there, hit my glasses. Chapter 4 will be part 4, and today we'll do chapter 2, even though we read chapter 7 today, and I'll just go through in order. Now, my plan is to continue doing this on Monday and Thursday, which means that the final Thursday of February we would end with chapter 9, and there are 10 chapters. So what I'm going to do is someplace in there I'm going to do an extra one, or it might be into March when I do the last one. And with the last one, chapter 10, I'm hoping to talk about Purim. If I don't talk about it in chapter 10, then I'll talk about it in another video, because I would really like to talk about that Jewish holiday and how it relates to us as Christians. Because our roots as Christians are Jewish. Paul said that we're grafted into the Jewish olive tree. And I have found that by learning about and even celebrating the Jewish holidays at least once, and with some of them like Passover, I've done many, many times, you learn and you understand more of even the New Testament. You definitely understand more of the Old Testament when you experience those holidays for yourself, but you also understand things in the New Testament better as well. So anyway, so let's get into chapter 2 of Esther. This is kind of where the fun begins. We had it set up in chapter 1 where we hadn't even learned about Esther yet. We learned about Queen Vashti, who refused to come in and present herself to a party of people who were, and probably men, who were carousing and everything. But she didn't obey the king. And that was a problem. He wanted her to come in. He wanted to show her off. And she decided not to. She disobeyed the king. And so upon the advice of his advisors, who said, hey, if you let her get away with this, then every woman in the empire is going to disobey her husband. So the king Ahasuerus, or Xerxes, depending on which version you're reading, and these are both the same person, it's just different languages that the name are given in. Ahasuerus decided to go ahead and exile Vashti. So then he's left without a queen. And it's pretty important for a king to have a queen for many, many reasons, and we won't get into those right now. But what happens in chapter 2 is that he decides to start searching for a queen. And so messengers, or perhaps soldiers, we're not really sure, are sent out throughout the empire to gather all the beautiful virgin girls. Now, whether this was a voluntary thing that the girls could say, yeah, I'd like a try at being queen, or whether they were just taken by force, we don't really know. Most movies and books and such show them being taken by force. That's probably makes a better story, but we don't really know. So the Bible's not clear on that. So anyway, so Esther is one of the virgins who is brought to the king's palace to be prepared to try out to be queen. And Mordecai, who is her cousin, who has guardianship of her because her parents died, he has told her, don't tell anyone that you're a Jew. And this is really important. We see that God gave him the wisdom to say that to her at this time because of how it plays out in the rest of the story. So Esther is taken in, and the girls are prepared for a year before going into the king. And it talks about what their preparation is, all these myrrhs, these oils of myrrh and cosmetics and different things. But they go through a lot of beauty rituals and training. And then when they get their night to go in with the king, they get to choose anything that they want from the harem to take in with them. Now it's really interesting because Esther decides to ask the guy in charge, Haggai, to ask him what he thinks she should take in with her, and she only takes in what he says to take in. And it doesn't make a big deal about that, but it just mentions that she took in only what he said. And when she went into the king, she found such favor with him that he immediately put the crown on her head and chose her as his queen. So then she's become queen, and there's a big celebration, big party and everything, and I would imagine a wedding ceremony of some kind. And it at the end of the chapter, it talks about how Mordecai would sit outside the gate because he wanted to know what was happening with Esther. And as he was sitting outside the gate one day, he overheard a conspiracy to kill the king. So he reported it to Esther, and she told the king, and the king was able to have the conspirators killed. And the episode was written down in the Chronicles of the King. But at that point, Mordecai was not rewarded. And that's also an important thing to remember for later on in the story. Okay, so the questions are, what do I learn about God? What do I learn about myself or people that applies to myself from this chapter? And then thirdly, what difference does it make in my life? What am I going to do with this? Okay, so the first thing, and again, like I've said before, you're probably going to find something different. You're not going to find the same thing that I am. There are lots of things to find in this chapter, in every chapter. And God's going to speak to you through his word depending on where you are at the time. So I'm sure that other people have come up with the same thing. I'm not saying that, nobody else has come up with what I'm coming up with, but what I'm coming up with may not be what God speaks to you from this chapter. But what he's shown me from this chapter to kind of emphasize is that he prepares us. He gives us, maybe this is the better way to say it, he gives us the opportunity to be prepared for whatever it is that he's called us to. And a lot of times we don't know exactly what it is that we've been called to. Esther didn't know for certain that she was being called to be the queen. She was there, and I would imagine that that was her hope. But she didn't know for sure that the king was going to choose her. There were many virgins who were brought in there, and apparently they were probably all very beautiful, and they had all been put through this whole year of beauty rituals and everything. And so there was no reason for her to necessarily think that she was going to become queen. But God knew what the plan was, and so he was doing what needed to be done to prepare her. He gave her favor with Haggai, the head eunuch who was in charge of all the virgins, and he set her up with the best things, the best servants and everything, because she was his favorite. So already you can see how God's putting her in place. And then the cosmetics and the beauty rituals, those were all things that needed to be done to prepare for the position that she was going to have. And those are things that we might look at as being worldly. They are worldly, right? I mean, there's nothing real spiritual about makeup and beauty rituals and stuff, but this is what she needed in order to fulfill the role that God had for her to save his people. But to be able to do that, she needed to win the heart of the king. And it's interesting because I, and probably a lot of you, tend to think of those things as not being maybe part of God's plan. I wear cosmetics. If I didn't, I would probably scare you. No, I've done some videos without them, but I don't think that there's anything wrong with cosmetics, is what I'm saying. But I tend to think that that's superficial and unnecessary. But you know what? The reason that I wear cosmetics when I do these videos is because I don't want to distract you with my ugliness or even um, my low self-image when I'm not wearing cosmetics. Maybe it doesn't make any difference in how I look, but it makes a difference to me. And so it takes my mind off of my looks and helps me to focus on what I'm trying to teach you and talk to you about. But there are other reasons for wearing makeup as well. And again, I'm not saying that you should wear makeup or that you shouldn't wear makeup. I'm just saying that some of these things that are indeed worldly things are things that God uses to get us into the position that He wants us to be in to do the job that He has for us. And so, again, I'm not saying go off and spend all your time wearing makeup or trying to make yourself beautiful or whatever. That's not my point at all. My point is that God's going to give you the things that you need to have to be able to do the job that He has for you. And sometimes that is going to include some things that are not wrong, but that are quote unquote worldly. So that's something that I actually need to be reminded of, because to be honest, I'd rather just, spend my time on more spiritual things. That's just who I am. And it doesn't make me better than anybody else or anything like that. I don't mean it in that way. It's just my preference. I'm not really much of a social person. That's just not me. And so a lot of those things just don't mean anything to me. I don't enjoy shopping or anything. I hate shopping or anything like that. So it's just not me. But those things might be things that I need to pay a little bit more attention to in order to do the things that God has called me to do. So those are two things right there, two questions that are answered. One, I was talking about what God does, which is that He gives us the opportunity and He gives us the resources and everything that we need to prepare for the work that He wants us to do. Second is that we need to be willing to take advantage of those opportunities and those resources that He brings and He puts in our way. How do we know from the many, many things out there what we're supposed to take advantage of? And this is question number 3. What am I going to do with this? How does this apply to me? How do we know? Because it's like, we don't know what God's plan is for us farther down in our lives. Most of us don't. Some people have been told, but most people really don't know more than like, okay, what I'm supposed to do today. Or maybe He's given us a little bit of a plan farther out, but we don't know ultimately what His whole plan is for us. And so we don't really know what to prepare for. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important to have a relationship with God where you're praying and you're asking Him, because then He will give you that guidance. He still may not tell you what that ultimate plan is. He didn't tell Esther, hey, I'm going to have you go in and do this really dangerous thing to save your people. He just gave her a little bit at a time. In fact, in chapter 2, for most of chapter 2, she didn't even know she was going to be queen. So she didn't know what she was preparing her for. But we need to trust God that He knows. And then as He shows us through His Holy Spirit, this is what I want you to do. This is what I want you to learn. These are the people that I want you to talk to. These are the opportunities that I want you to take advantage of, or the activities that I want you to participate in. We have to trust God that He knows what He's talking about and do those things, because those are the things that will prepare us for what He's called us to do. So my challenge, and what am I going to do about this, is to, first of all, be a little bit more open to things that I consider to be unimportant, because some of those things really might be important. And I need to trust God in that when He shows me those things. And I think that's what He's showing me right now is, okay, you need to be a little bit more alert to these things that I'm giving you the opportunity to learn. And I don't know what those things are yet, but just so that I will be in that frame of reference, and to be accepting that those things really can matter, even though I tend to think that they're just superficial and they don't matter. But superficial things can make a big difference. And I guess maybe that's part of the point of what God's trying to teach me through this chapter today. And I'm just kind of seeing this as I'm talking to you, is that sometimes the things that we look at as superficial are actually really important in being able to fulfill his plan for us. So that's chapter 2. That's just an example of what I found in answering those questions. Now I want you to read the chapter for yourself and ask yourself, what did I learn about God from this chapter? What did I learn about myself or people in general, but it applies to me? And then what am I going to do with that, or how am I going to apply that? Okay, and I will see you again on Monday with chapter 3. I love you all, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.